and it's the off season. So
Yeah,
I don't know about you. I'm feeling like off season mode right now.
yeah. I've been, especially this week, I've been a little disconnected just because it's been busy. But yeah, and I was thinking when the last episode was, and it was 2 weeks ago, right?
Was it only 2 weeks ago? Oh my
I
gosh.
think so, or maybe
Wow.
more. Yeah,
No, I think you're
I think it
right.
was 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, you're right. It was just 2 weeks ago. Man,
But yeah,
holiday in between kind of messed everything up.
it seems like it's been forever.
One thing I'm trying to do here is, like I told you before we started streaming, I'm trying to stream this on Instagram before we record our pod. Um, and I don't think it likes the widescreen version for some reason.
Um,
Maybe I'll just do it, and then if it's like massively screwed up, people can let me know, and I'll never do it again. You never know if you don't try, right?
yeah.
So let's give it a shot. Let's see. Edit that. Edit that. This is making some real good streaming right here.
All right.
Watching the sausage get made.
The
Also, I think you can like
magic behind.
yeah, this is why we go live before we start recording for the pod.
Hmm.
Let's see what happens. People are seeing this, and then maybe they'll let me know if Instagram looks absolutely awful. Because when I previewed it, it was trying to do like a portrait mode, landscape.
Okay.
So who really knows? This is the first time I've even looked at it, and I thought off season, might as well play around with it, see what happens.
Yeah. Test it out.
Yeah. So okay, I think I got that. We'll just let it go and see what happens. You ready to record the pod?
Yeah. Do you remember, was Jensen's loan also like through June?
Both of them are, yeah.
Okay. I wanted to make sure about Jensen's. I knew Pedro was through June, but couldn't remember about Jensen.
Okay, ready, Santi?
Let's do it.
All right. Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker, joined as always with Santiago Beltran, and we are in off-season mode here on Flyover, but we have some news this week to cover, so we're taking a break from our break to get to looking at that. We've got City end-of-season roster decisions made today, Wednesday, November 29th, that we're recording this. Santi, how you going, and how's the off-season treating you?
Hey, doing great, Matt. I've been out of town the last few days, so I'm a little disconnected with what's going on. But happened to see the news today, and we were thinking, hey, it's probably gonna be like late Thursday or maybe Friday, so no pod this week. But obviously, with the announcement, we had to change our plans and do a podcast
On
tonight.
a Wednesday we're recording. It's different from our usual Thursday. It's earlier than we were going to do. I think we were planning on doing one or two between Christmas, but why not? It's a perfect time to talk about this. And for better or for worse, I feel like it was pretty close to exactly what we expected. But there is a little bit of news we can talk about before we get to season roster decisions. Some good news. MLS announced their best 11 of the 2023 season. Roman Berkey, Tim Parker representing St. Louis City. We're one of four teams, I believe, along with Atlanta, Nashville, and FC Cincinnati to have more than one player. So an amazing accomplishment for a team in their first season. Berkey and Parker, captains, all-stars. Berkey won, obviously, goalkeeper of the year. Parker was a finalist for the defender of the year. So both amazing accolades for those two players. And it's awesome to have City represented so early and so heavily on the MLS Best 11 for the season.
Yeah, I love it. It's like another accomplishment by the club, having two players on the best 11. Like Berkey, for me, expected just because he was the goalkeeper of the year. Even though Parker was in the last three for Defender of the Year, I wasn't sure if he was gonna make it. But it's been a great year for him. He has done great things in St. Louis. It's like his career has um, taken like a resurgence, and he's like a new player. So I love that.
And you hope that it carries over to next season. I mean, his mentorship, his leadership, along with Berkey and the experience that both of them brought, has done wonders for City in developing their players. So, as we kind of look to the roster decisions that City made, you hope that both of these players and some of the others who are newer to City but maybe have some experience will continue that mentorship and with any new player that we choose to sign. So, with that kind of segue, Santi, let's spend the rest of our pod looking at these end of season roster decisions. The press release City put out today, let's start with that. St. Louis City SC has announced their end of season moves. The club has exercised the options of 8 players, meaning they've picked up the club options, which let's level set. Most MLS contracts, like we talked about on our previous episode, have an option that the club can choose to pick up or decline at the end of their contract. So most contracts are standard with an option year for the club at the end. The club exercised the options of Sam Adeniran, AZ Jackson, Celio Pompeu, Jared Stroud, Akil Watts, Lucas Bartlett, Anthony Markanic, and Josh Yarrow. All of the players that we really expected them to pick up the option for. No real shockers there. And guys that we talked about like Celio, like Akil, coming up from City 2, proving themselves this year and really earning the opportunity for next year. What do you think about these players that we decided to pick up the option for?
Yeah, I think for the most part is what we expected. It's great to see guys like Akil Watts and Celio Pompeu get rewarded. Last year they were with City 2. They were signed to MLS contracts this year, and they perform when they got a chance to play. So I really like that. I know on our last episode we weren't sure about Josh Jarrow's contract situation, but now we know there was a club option that was picked up, which is also great. I'm happy to see him coming back for another year. He is one of those players that had to wait a long time to get some significant minutes, and he took advantage of those when he got them, and he was able to get a few stars, even started in playoffs. So it's great to see that, and yeah, some guys that didn't get their option picked up or were out were out of contract. I just go back to what Jake Narwinski said on the end of the year media availability. Like, yeah, this is a great group, but we know that this is a business, and some guys will not be back. And yeah, like if the club is going to look for other players to fill some positions, he has to release some of those roster spots because we know those are not unlimited like in other
That's
places.
right. And one of the things I find interesting about this whole process is as a first year club, we're getting to see a little bit of how the sausage is made from the business side of things. And we can kind of glean some information out of this. So for instance, we know going forward that it's pretty, I guess, standard, or we can expect that whenever teams announce contracts and lengths of contracts, they're going to come with a club option at the end. That seems a pretty standard thing in MLS. And I even in fact saw a tweet that somebody put out that was really from the player's perspective. It's we think of this as the clubs. It's great that they have this option to keep a player or to let them go, but from a player's perspective, it seems kind of harsh. And it's one of those things for MLS that you wonder how much the Players Association is going to push for changes to this at some point, because you look at a guy like, let's say, Michael Creek, where he's not knowing what his status is going to be for next year. He doesn't know if maybe he should pick up the lease on an apartment if he has one, or he doesn't know where the
Yeah.
family might be living after this year because he doesn't know if he's going to stay in St. Louis or not. You wonder how early the club communicated to the players, because it really does seem like kind of a tough situation to be in if you're a player.
Yeah, like yeah, from that side, yes, but at the same time, it gives you a little bit of, well, it's uncertainty and maybe certainty at the same time, because you know, okay, if I perform well, I will have a chance to stay one more
Yep.
year. But yeah, it's too difficult to plan for different things. if you don't know where you're going to be at the beginning of the following year, and you have to wait for so long. But as you said, maybe these things are communicated a little bit earlier, and the players can plan for that. But yeah, just looking at the players that didn't get their options picked up or that were out of contract, all of those make some kind of sense to me.
Yeah, and so coming into this, we obviously have it that St. Louis had 17 players under contract. They had most of the team was under contract for the 2024 season. We added Tyson Pierce as a homegrown player, so he's the one pickup that we've had so far that wasn't on the team in 2023. We add these 8 players, and so what? Sorry, let me backtrack. We had 19 coming into this with the 2 players on loan. So we're up to 27 total, and we're going to get to that towards the end. But there were 5 players that we decided to let go in one way, shape, or form. 2 of those players had their contract options declined: Max Schneider, Michael Creek. Johnny Nelson was out of contract, and he's a free agent now after his years of service and his age. He met the requirements. He, like we speculated, Johnny Nelson is the only player to qualify for free agency, and our good friend Tom Bogert clarified that it was just misspoken by City, and that Johnny Nelson is a candidate for free agency, whereas John Bell is out of contract and available in the year-end waiver draft. So anybody who listened to our last episode knows that the waiver draft is essentially the step down from free agency, where players who haven't met the years of service and the age requirements to be free agents in MLS, they qualify for the waiver draft, which is 2 rounds that will occur in the re-entry. So he will be available for clubs to select. Otherwise, St. Louis basically still holds his rights and will have that going forward for John Bell. The last one, which writing on the wall in this one, but it's one of those unfortunate things that we'll cover a little bit more later. But MLS Super Draft pick Owen O'Malley was waived. This we all saw coming. We speculated on it. But this, along with the other 4, like you said, no real surprises here, right? I mean, each one of them has their own nuance or specific scenario that they're going through, but none of these are really shockers, are they?
No, maybe out of that group, maybe Michael Creek. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about
Mm-hmm.
him once we start going into the details for each player. But it just, to me, it was unexpected just because he had been the third option for a goalkeeper. So it will be interesting what direction the club goes.
Mm-hmm.
Do they want a more experienced goalkeeper, or maybe they want to start developing the goalkeeper of the future?
Very good points. Let's start it with Johnny Nelson, because Santi, I guess this could be one of those things that we try to do regularly every single year as far as how we look at this. But if anybody follows STL Soccer Tracker on Twitter, they know that St. Louis loves their players, not just the players who are currently playing for us in one way, shape, or form, but players who have played and move on to other ventures. God bless Brian Simpson for running that and trying to keep track of this going forward. But we're going to give each one of these players their due. It's the first time we've had players for City play and depart, so we want to recognize each one of them for what their contributions, what their performances were this year and before, for Michael Creek in particular, Max Schneider as well, and wish them well going forward. So looking at each one of these players and what we're basically losing that they brought to us this past year, starting with Johnny Nelson. He was selected 4th by St. Louis City in their 2022 expansion draft. He started the 2023 season as City's starting left back. He beat out Selmer Pedro in the preseason. It was one of those where we assumed Pedro would start. Nelson surprised us, and he kept it going. He appeared in 18 total matches for City, starting 15 of them in all competitions, one of them being a Leagues Cup match against the Columbus Crew. He had 1 official assist on the season, but I recall multiple balls going off of the other players and his services to Klaus.
Yeah,
He should have had meaningfully, he had more than 1 assist, but 1 official assist. Nelson's last start and appearance for City in MLS play came on July 12th in a 3-0 midweek loss to LAFC. Before that, he wasn't really a regular starter ever since losing his spot to Kyle Hebert, converted center back on May 20th against Sporting KC. So Nelson starts the year. He's a part of that historic 5 wins to start the year. Klaus goes down against Colorado. A couple games later, Nelson is replaced as left back, and things just never really looked back for St. Louis as far as the left back position. And Nelson really never found his way back into that starting 11 regularly.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly things can change. Like, yeah, he was part of that historic 5 win start, and he was a regular starter. And then he had that red card against Chicago Fire, and then the following game was that game against Sporting KC. That I don't remember exactly how we looked at it, but I think we were thinking, okay, this is probably gonna be a star for Pedro,
Mm.
and then Kyle Huber starts, and then he took the job from there until the arrival of Anthony Marcanic. But it's just like like a lot of things like happening. Like he got the red card, and I think at that point, like he had started to maybe not being the same defender that he was at the beginning of the season. So and then Kyle Huber performed well against Sporting KC and took the job, and that was kind of the end for Nelson. Then Anthony Marcanic came, so I think the writing on the wall was there.
Yeah, when Lutz was honest about Marcanic coming in as a designed backup at a left back position, and you had Hebert having started a few months by that point, it was pretty clear that Nelson had lost his spot on the depth chart, and Pedro was just nowhere to be seen. But the red card's an interesting call out because I honestly had forgotten about that, but it paints a little bit of a narrative. I was more thinking about it from the perspective of tactics, where Kyle Hebert, much more defensive minded. You need to shore up that spot. You can't give up the space and the opportunities on our left side. And then just at that point, we had been without Klaus for a few games. We were just trying to get back into a rhythm, trying to get back into our winning ways. And it was the same scenario that we eventually saw multiple places in the roster where you give a guy a chance in a position, the team wins with them, and you don't change it. And I think Nelson, to me, I was always viewing him as just a victim of that kind of a circumstance where he didn't really do anything overly bad, red card notwithstanding, to warrant just being benched. It's just circumstances of we went a different direction and it started working. And so then you eventually go to pulling in Marcanic. And when you pull in Marcanic and you bring him in, there was pretty clearly something going on that long term you didn't really see a spot for Nelson. And now we have it confirmed.
Yeah, but when he started at the beginning of the season, he did well, and as you said, had one official assist, but he participated in other goals. But yeah, it's just one of those things. It's a business, and now he's a free agent. We joke around with our only free agent. I'm sure another team will pick him up.
One thing has to be said though is regardless of how his tenure with City ended up and the fact that he didn't see any starts or match time since Leagues Cup and MLS play since July 12th, Nelson was a part of that historic five wins to start the season. And
Hmm.
we've talked multiple times about how if it wasn't for that start, this season would have looked vastly different in a lot of ways. Could have definitely impacted playoff, just the possibility of being in the playoffs, definitely wouldn't have ended first in the West. So the contributions to Nelson and how we look back on his time with City really, to me, are viewed in a much more positive light than we probably are right now, just because of what he did
Hmm.
to start us off and the things that nobody's going to be forgetting about how this season started. Nelson was a huge part of that.
Yeah, he was a big contributor during that initial stretch of 10, 15 games. But yeah, just as I said, things can change quickly in soccer, and the way the team was playing with when Kyle Huber replaced Nelson, they won a few games in a row, and that was the end of it for Nelson.
Pivoting to his expansion draft mate, selected third by City in the 2022 expansion draft was John Bell. This one was confounding throughout the season. This was one that we never really understood the logic or the thought process for huge portions of the season. Like we thought something might have been going on. We found out eventually that there had been injuries picked up. So we talked earlier in the season. Bell had an injury coming into the season that he picked up. He had some I call it an injury. Remember
The
the
frostbite.
frostbite on his foot and the cryo chamber? That was unfortunate and just bizarre.
Yeah,
But Bell's one of those players who never really cracked through in any meaningful way. He appeared in only 3 matches for St. Louis, two of them against the aforementioned LAFC in that 3-0 loss, as well as a starting against Minnesota United late in the year, September 23rd, a 2-1 away victory. That was just a fun match to see St. Louis pull one out, and Bell was a huge part of that. His first match day roster, though, didn't come until 2 months into the season. So injury, we signed Lucas Bartlett, we saw the depth chart start to play out. Bell didn't make the game day roster until 2 months into the season. It was a 1-1 draw against Colorado. We just talked about the Klaus game where he was injured. And he didn't appear in the match, but that was the first time he was on the roster. If that didn't tell us enough, that he didn't make the starting 11 in an early U.S. Open Cup rotated lineup against Union Omaha. That was the shocker to me early in the season, where we really saw the depth chart play out, where you're looking at Lucas Bartlett, Josh Yarrow, Kyle Hebert being well ahead of Bell in the depth chart, whether it's injury related or not. Bell did eventually make an appearance in that game in the U.S. Open Cup, and then he made some appearances for City 2. He made 4 appearances and starts, going the full 90 in all 4 between April 30th and June 14th. And then minus that appearance against Minnesota, he really didn't feature in much at that point. So Bell being given declining an option there, being given his opportunity to go to waivers. What do you think about the impact John Bell had, the ups and downs throughout the season, and how do you view John Bell in our inaugural year?
Yeah, so obviously he is one of those situations like he couldn't get a break. Like he started the year recovering from injury, and like every time he was like progressing with his recovery, like something else happened, and then at the same time, Lucas Bartlett was also signed at the beginning of the season, and it's another player that when he got his chances, he performed well and basically moved him down on the depth chart. And yeah, he just didn't get a lot of chances. But I'm gonna say when he had chances to play that LAFC match, also against Minnesota, he looked good. I like what I saw from him. So hopefully he'll find a place. But I think it's just unfortunate how the season started for him, and then all the circumstances around it, and other players doing well. He just couldn't break the starting lineup too much.
And when you look at the fact that he couldn't break through, you don't look to it as anything necessarily wrong with John Bell. To me, it's more so the quality that was on display for St. Louis City. We had some great center back depth all year long, and it was 3, maybe even 4 deep at certain times in the year, especially with Joachim Nilsson coming back. And what that really provided for, we even saw Lucas Bartlett see some time with City too towards the end of the year, because certain players getting pushed down the depth chart. And so we're going to talk later about the left back position, but when you see all of our center backs that we still have on the roster, there had to have been an odd man out. We were speculating, is it going to be Bartlett? Is it going to be Bell? Because it should clearly be one of those two, at least from what we've seen this year. And for better or worse, John Bell is that odd man out. And it will be interesting to see where he lands, because we know the quality when he was with New England. We know the passionate fan base that followed him at New England. So I'll be interested to see where he lands, and hopefully he's able to crack through an MLS roster in the years to come.
Who's next?
Michael Creek is next. So Michael Creek was signed at the beginning of the year to be the third keeper. There was no question about his spot on the depth chart. It was Berkey, Ben Lunt, Michael Creek. Creek was signed from City 2. He was the starting goalkeeper for City 2 in 2022 for 13 matches. He had 3 clean sheets, 29 saves last year in 22 for City 2. He was always going to be the third keeper, like I said, but unfortunately, or fortunately for City, I suppose, Creek didn't see any playing time. Berkey started everything he could. Lunt started the Open Cup. He started Leagues Cup, and he started the one MLS match. So, there wasn't really a space for Creek outside of an injury need, which thankfully City didn't have. So instead, he saw 11 appearances and 8 starts for City 2 this year. He recorded 18 saves in the process. And Santi, to me, this is a case of he's a 25-year-old. We have a host of goalkeepers chomping at the bit from the academy to City 2. And this is a move that unfortunately for Creek, because he's a really nice guy,
Mm-hmm.
it made sense in what we need to do to continue developing our goalkeeper position, especially looking towards the far future, where Roman Berkey's not always going to be wearing a City kit. He's not always going to be in net, and we need to continue to develop that pathway to pro that the Academy and City 2 offer. And it sounds like I would speculate that that's probably going to start next year.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I was saying at the beginning. It would be interesting if maybe an experienced goalkeeper, just thinking about CONCACAF Champions Cup, or right away the team goes in that direction of developing the goalkeeper of the future, which to me makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
But yeah, Berkey had a great year, and I'm sure he still has a few more years of where he can perform at a high level. But at some point, you have to start thinking about the future, and St. Louis being basically a place where a lot of goalkeepers have developed, and there is so much talent and so many good goalkeeper coaches. It makes sense to me to start that process. It will be. I'm looking forward to seeing who will be that third goalkeeper, and if it is a young guy, imagine just being around Roman Berkey, and both Lutz and Bradley spoke very highly about Ben Loon and his leadership. So
Mhm.
it'll be great for a young guy to develop behind Berkey and Lund.
Yeah, and later on in the episode, we're going to talk about our depth chart and what we think who City needs to sign. I think it's fairly okay to assume that one of those open roster slots is going to go to a goalkeeper for the third slot. So you look at guys like Christian Olivares, you look at some of the academy players, UPSL like Nick Bishop, and you wonder if one of those players is going to get an opportunity. So keep that kind of thing in mind when you're thinking about the flexibility that we're going to talk about in a bit. And one player who, yes, we definitely were excited about him coming into the year, but had their option declined was Max Schneider, the other player along with Creek who had their option declined. Max Schneider, you could call him a City player, but even that I think is kind of a stretch. And I'm doing that with no malice. It was one of the weirder things because if we talk about circumstance and victims of circumstance, I think Max Schneider is definitely one of the biggest victims of circumstance. He was signed from City 2 with extremely little pomp and circumstance. I had to go back and make sure that he was actually listed at some point prior to the season starting as being on the roster just because I thought I was losing my mind at one point.
Yeah,
And the only thing that they did is in a group together article, they included Max Schneider along with all the other players as having picked up a contract. He wasn't given a unique article, he wasn't given a focus. It was just, oh yeah, we've also signed Max Schneider. And with City 2 and his impact this year, he he took up an international slot for City. He was the only season-long official loan to City 2, and he did appear in 27 games, starting 25 of them for City 2. He was basically their stalwart in the midfield. He was the guy who was keeping everything together and progressing the ball. He had 6 assists on the year. He was a very stable position for City 2 with Max Schneider, but whether you look at the depth that we had on the first team, the need that we had. I point to the international slot as the biggest impediment to Max Schneider finding time with City. I don't know if he was viewed as not ready, but I know that if he would have been on the City roster, he would have taken up an international slot. And we didn't have an open slot for a large portion of the season. So something would have had to have occurred with another team to acquire one. I don't know the nuances to that, but I know that was a factor. And so, unfortunately, he didn't make any appearances just like Michael Creek with City, but he had a couple years with City 2 for us that was fun to see him play.
yeah, he had 2 great years with City Two, and initially after the end of the season, I thought, oh, maybe he will be back and get his option picked up. Probably by the time the season starts, he will have a green card, so the international slot won't be an option. But yeah, he due to not enough international slots, he couldn't make the team. And the other thing, the other way I see it, you also have like Miguel Perez at the beginning of the season saw a lot of minutes and he
A
performed
lot.
well. So I think that's also part of that decision making. The club decides, okay, we're going to continue developing Miguel Perez, and maybe one of those roster slots that will open up could be another central midfielder. Just thinking about about the amount of games the team will play next year.
It's easy to see a need for depth there. One of the central midfielders who was never intended to play central midfielder for City is Owen O'Malley. Played central midfield for Creighton. And he's our last one that we're going to talk about. Yeah, you talk about circumstances in some of these players. I don't know how to describe Owen O'Malley's time with City. I really don't, because he was drafted 9th overall in the Super Draft. He was City's Generation Adidas signing out of Creighton, only GA signing that we had. Owen O'Malley never saw the field for City, and he only appeared in 14 City 2 matches, starting 7 of them, playing right back. That's where we had him slotted in as developing and being the future right back for City. That was the thought. He was that GA pick, so he went early. City famously said that they traded away the first overall pick, and Owen O'Malley would have been their first pick regardless.
Mm-hmm.
How much you want to believe that as far as reality or coach speak in backing up your pick? We got a lot of GAM. We got $400,000 a GAM from Charlotte to trade out of the first spot. So if we had no desire to pick anyone but Owen O'Malley, I don't have an issue with it, but it clearly didn't work out. We don't know really overall what went wrong with Owen O'Malley, but we do know that he was suspended at 1 point, or was it 2 points?
I think it was twice, but we didn't find out until the second time.
Yeah. So earlier in the season, he had been suspended for violating team rules, I believe it was said. Mm-hmm. And we never really understood or got specifics on what that meant. Internal turmoil, suspensions, whatever ended up happening, there were a lot of questions. And there's always going to be questions, I think, about Owen O'Malley and what could have been, what went wrong. And if it was just he was a victim of the culture, the system, there's a way to do things. Everybody else was on board, and there's one player who wasn't. It's not unheard of to have individual players just not, whether it's not buying in, not being ready for the big show, the big time, or whatever it was. It's all speculation. Like we could go on for a while speculating, but at the end of the day, it didn't work out. And our first round super draft pick, the only first round super draft pick that we will have had in our first 2 years, is no longer a member of St. Louis City.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why the club ended up like, let me rephrase. So the club traded that first pick in the draft.
Yeah.
Do you think it has something to do with the way things develop with Owen O'Malley?
I don't think it was the reason that they traded away the pick, but I think it was just fuel to the fire in not valuing the first round pick, or really many picks, if at all. So they used 2 of their 3 picks last year. The first was Owen O'Malley, the second was John Klein, and they traded away the 3rd pick. So we saw early a lack of valuing the super draft and giving an opportunity to the local player in John Klein as your 2nd round pick. What we're seeing now, I think, is just a continuation of that. And so there probably was something to seeing how the super draft pick worked out and saying, okay, we already weren't valuing this that much. We trust our academy. We trust our path to pro that we have from the academy to our 2 team to City. This is just another example that makes us lean harder into not valuing it that much. That's probably the best way I could think about his impact to the overall thought process.
Yeah, but we wish him well. I remember talking to him at the beginning of the season. Very nice guy, but yeah, when I talked to him, I got that vibe. Like he mentioned, yeah, it's been like an up and down journey to get here. So who knows what's going on with him? But I wish him well.
Yeah. We wish all 5 of them well. Everybody has their own unique place in City history. They're always going to be St. Louisans to some extent. We're always going to know that they wore the crest, whether it's City 2, and they were a part of this history. So their names are always going to be in the back of our minds when we think about this inaugural year. But where does this leave the City roster going forward, and what can we look forward to in the next few weeks as part of the offseason. So rosters are still locked until December 11th. After MLS Cup and MLS Cup final, rosters will unlock and we'll have all of those calendar of events that we talked about last week. For now, we know that St. Louis City has 27 total players under contract for 2024. 2 goalkeepers, 7 defenders, 12 midfielders, 4 forwards, and 2 of them are on loan. Selmer Pedro and Isak Jensen's loans go until June 2024. So they go until the end of the seasons for their respective clubs. I'm nearly positive for that. Pedro is the only one I'm not entirely sure, but I know Jensen's goes for the duration of the season. So St. Louis starts this upcoming year right now with 25 players occupying roster slots, because when you send a player on loan, you can backfill their roster slot even though you're given no salary relief. So we have 5 open roster slots. We have 2 DPs on the roster. We have 8 international players because you can't count Pedro and Jensen. They don't take up roster slots or international slots. We have cap flexibility. We have a DP slot available. We have U22 slots available. And like I said, we have 5 slots to fill. So whether we look to fill all 5, whether we look to fill 3, that's the question. And so when we look at what we need to fill, we kind of alluded to it earlier, Santi. In my mind, there are a few spaces that you can really peg. We could use some help with depth because we do have an extra competition this year in CONCACAF Champions Cup. We have only 2 goalkeepers under contract right now. So you could say one slot might go to a goalkeeper. We have turmoil still in our minds, at least in the fans' minds, at left back. That's an easy slot, right? We mentioned central midfield. So when you look at the depth chart as it stands now, knowing that we have so much stability and familiarity existing, and really every single starter is returning, where do you see some needs for City?
Well, it's more that depth piece, and just thinking about the competitions, and you start the season earlier than last year with CONCACAF Champions Cup, and you don't ever wish for anybody to get injured, but it's part of the season. It's part of what happens with the team. So it'll be good to have some depth and some ways to rotate the lineup, because you will have to start rotating early because you have CONCACAF Champions Cup, and then a few weeks later you start the season, and if you advance to the second round of CONCACAF Champions Cup, that's another set of games. So yeah, I think the ones we have already talked about: left back, center midfielder. Um, I'm not sure if either another striker or maybe another offensive midfielder, but there are 5 spots. The question is, do they go and take care of the 5, knowing that in June, when the loans for Pedro and Jensen expire, they're going to have to figure out what to do with them, or maybe just do something more conservative, like what they did last year, that they didn't occupy the 30 roster
Mm-hmm.
slots at the beginning of the season, and keep something for mid-year, for when the transfer window opens. But yeah, I think the usual positions that we have been discussing will be the ones that will get filled.
I honestly would be shocked if we signed 5 players between now and the start of the season.
Hmm.
It doesn't fit the few things that we heard Lutz talk about last year, dating back to this time last year when he talked about keeping flexibility open. He
Yeah.
acquired more international slots than we used, so he would have one available season that he spent on Knut Thorson. When you look at the fact that we have 3 legitimate open roster slots along with those 2 that are on loan, I do look for a goalkeeper potentially. I look for a left back and center mid. Those are my 3, I guess,
Hmm.
priorities. Goalkeeper's not really a priority, but I think there's an opportunity for one of the academy or maybe Oliveras to step up and I think get a City contract. The only alternative would be you run with 2 goalkeepers and then you bring up a short-term loan if you need to for Oliveras at City 2. There are mechanisms, so if you need him in a pinch for U.S. Open Cup or something, you can bring him up without occupying a slot. So that's an avenue for goalkeeper. I would like to see that used because I think it would keep a roster slot from being used on a third keeper that just kind of it's not Michael Creek that went to waste, but that roster slot went to waste because it was never used and never really needed. You can always bring him up if you keep an open roster slot just in case with an eye towards
Mm,
the summer transfer window, but if you need to, you can fill it. It's that kind of thing.
so
But
can you only have two? Is for some reason I thought it was a
the short-term
requirement.
loans,
No, two goalkeepers on the roster. Is that an option to only have two?
I think it's an option. There was I want to say Leagues Cup had a rule where you had to have three keepers. But
That's probably what I'm thinking about.
yeah, there was a rule at one point that you had to roster three keepers, but I do think there was we had like a 40-man roster basically for that. Remember, we had Johnny Klein was
Yes.
listed. That was a little wild of a situation. But if we look at the biggest needs, left back and center mid are mine. Left back because you're looking at two options with the people you have on your roster right now. You're looking at Kyle Hebert remaining your starting left back, which is something that I think would concern right now. Like you would have to tell Kyle, we want you to be our starting left back so he can work on developing himself in the offseason further towards that position. Otherwise, it's Anthony Marcanic, who Lutz was honest about bringing him in as a backup and saying he surprised us, he earned his spot. And so you're saying if you're comfortable with Marcanic as your starting left back, you've seen enough over the past back half of the season and in the offseason to be comfortable with him as your starting left back. There's a lot of assumptions that and trust that putting in the club that they've seen what they need to see out of those two players to be successful if you're not going to sign another one. Personally, I would like to see a high caliber player who can both be a left wing back as well as a left back, not unlike Akil Watts, but higher of a caliber, right? So more seasoned, and I think
More
that's
experience.
more experience. Yes, took the words right out of my mouth. Center mid is a position that I think it's going to depend on how comfortable you are with Miguel Perez and Tyson Pierce. Because right now, looking at depth charts, you can say Indiana Vasilev is a player you can slot in there. You can say Akil Watts is a player you can slot in there. But really, it's Leuven, it's Blom, and it's Miguel Perez. Tyson Pierce just starting if he follows the same mold as Caden Glover or a non-injury related Miguel Perez, you're going to give Tyson Pierce time with City 2. You're going to let him develop a little more slowly, hopefully not having to pull him in like you did Miguel Perez. That's why I want to see another central defensive midfielder. I think there's an opportunity early in the season, even if Leuven and Blom are healthy, you're going to need to spell them. They cannot play every match for competitions. It's not going to work. We saw Blom have issues with heat. We saw a lot of Leuven tiring or being played differently at the end of the season. That's not sustainable to have that group, I think, as the central midfielder. So that's a need and something that I think has to occur. So those two positions, that's two of the three to me. And then I look elsewhere, looking at kind of our depth chart in attacking mid, and I see depth, but that's an area attacking mid and right back even is a couple of areas to me where you have opportunities to just improve on who's here. You sign somebody if they're going to take somebody's spot. You don't sign somebody to be depth in these areas to me because you have bodies that you're comfortable with. You've extended and offered contracts or options to some of these players. You're comfortable with who you have in these roles. You sign somebody as an attacking mid, and maybe even striker, in a right back if they're going to take somebody's spot. If you expect to slot them in to start, that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah. I think in terms of depth, I think most of like with the guys the team has, there is enough. So I agree with you. If you're gonna bring somebody at striker or offensive mid, yeah, it has to be somebody with experience, or could also be somebody young, to use one of those U22 slots. When you were talking about center mid, with Tyson Pierce been there as part of the equation, I see him, and you mentioned him getting time with City too, but I see him more as basically what Max Snyder was last year. Maybe he will be the City two Loani,
Yeah.
and then you will open another roster slot, and yeah, bring an experienced midfielder that can rotate with Leuven and Blom and with Perez. I think it's important to have another piece with experience at that position.
There's a quote or a comment in the chat from Fatbug24 talking about Nuke Thorson, and I showed this on our stream because this is the thought that a lot of people in the fan base have. It's, do you think Thorson is a borderline bust, or was he signed with 2024 in mind? And the last couple of months have been purely for adjustment, a la first team guys signing with us in 2022. And I am 100% the latter. I fully
Yeah,
believe that Thorson, his time with City in 2023 was a preseason of sorts. Lutz said exactly as much at the end of season press conference when I asked him about the transfer window and what his thoughts and feelings were going forward. And he mentioned, that's when he mentioned Marcanic being signed as
yeah,
as depth, and he mentioned Thorson as exactly what happened with Berkey, Klaus, Leuven, Ostrak, and the group in 2022, bringing him in, getting him some time, acclimated to the culture, the system, the living here, and then ready to go in 2024. So almost as if he's a new signing in and of itself. And that's another reason why I don't necessarily see a need to fill an attacking mid or a striker position forward, because Thorson is so versatile. Like, we saw him play on the right side a little bit. We know he has a lot of experience on the left, and he can be the second striker type of a player. But if you're looking at especially how we ended the season up front, you're looking at Thorson as a much more viable option in 2024. You hope that Rasmus Alm comes back healthy. You have a fully healthy Klaus. Like, all these pieces that you were kind of piecemealing together throughout the season, you want them to be rested. You want them to be ready to go. These are frontline guys who are game changers, and that's one of the reasons why you can look to players like Jared Stroud, to Celio Pompeu, even Nico Gioacchini, Sam Adeniran, as depth to those guys. They can step up. They can make second half meaningful subs, like we saw Carnell be very adept at doing. They can start during Open Cup, during Champions Cup if you need to. But those guys, along with the frontline starters of Thorson potentially, Alm, Klaus, and whoever takes the role of the number 10, I think that's where you have your nucleus of attackers, and then the depth that we brought back is enough to handle the myriad of competitions that we had. Yeah, Chris Gebhardt in the chat says Alm is so important. He was a big miss at the end of the year. Could not agree more. Rasmus Alm is a
yeah.
game changer. We talked about his impact throughout the season, along with Jabula Blom, in the record that City had when they appeared, night and day without them. They are so incredibly key. And it's not, I'm not going to use the Cardinals euphemism of they're like new signings, even though I think I did with Thorson, but that's kind of how it will be. A full season of those players, markedly different than what we saw without them in 2023. But like you said, we don't need to beat a dead horse, but left back, center mid, and I've heard right back. People comment about right back, where you have Jake Nerwinski, you have Akil Watts, and I get that's a right back's a perfect example of, if you can find a player on the market, whether it's through free agency, through the waiver draft, re-entry, through an international spot, if you can find a right back that is head and shoulders above what we currently have, sure, go for it, sign it. I'm always all for improving certain positions and getting better players at each one of our positions, but if you're just going to sign a guy for depth to compete against those two, I don't really see the full value in that.
Yeah, and it might as well be one of those you run with Akil Watts and Jay Nerwinski at the beginning of the season, and maybe when the summer transfer window opens, if you see that there is still a need there and they are not giving the team what you expected, maybe then you can go and find a right back that can fight with that can compete for that job or take the job right away. But yeah, as you said, it needs to be somebody who will make impact right away. In either case, at the beginning of the season or mid-season.
I think the last thought I have on what we can look forward to and what we need to look for signings is how much our homegrowns are going to be forecasted to see playing time in 2024 is going to directly inform some of the moves we make. Center mid, we talked about Tyson Pierce being under contract now, a second season for Miguel Perez. Caden Glover is our fourth striker. And so there's depth there, how much time he's going to see. The moves we make, or the lack thereof, needs to keep in mind the fact that we do have these homegrowns who didn't see really any time down the stretch for City. Perez only played the beginning of the season as much as he did because of injuries and Jabulu Blom and things like that. So we needed him at certain points in the season, and he was able to. He had an injury at the end of the season, and he was able to recover and get back. And you want to keep in mind those three homegrowns when you think of the moves that we're making or that we won't make, and you can kind of read the tea leaves of what Lutz and Bradley Carnell have in mind for them based on that. But it all comes down to December 11th is when really everything starts to open after MLS Cup. Santi, we've got a couple weeks of this being everything to mull over and think about. Anything else you want to get out there?
No, no. And December 11 comes, and then we're gonna continue getting some news because we'll probably start hearing about rumors about possible signings or maybe announcements about signings. And then December 13, we also get the CONCACAF Champions Cup
That's right.
opponent and schedule, and then. When does the MLS schedule usually release? Also around that same time, right? Like
Probably a
toward the
little
end
bit
of the year.
after December 20th, I believe, was last year when
Okay.
it was released. So yeah, we'll see what that is. Yeah, so we've got a couple weeks of really no activity minus some rumors we might get. But the thing to keep in mind is after these moves, after the decisions made for some of the players, we have 27 total players under contract. There are 30 roster slots in MLS. Two of our players are on loan. We are capable of signing up to 5 players. Realistically, my money is on we'll sign at most 3, and that's assuming we fill all 30 of our roster slots with the 2 on loan. Keep that in mind that we are bringing back a massive majority of our team. It's not just the core nucleus of
Yeah.
our DPs and our biggest contributors. We're bringing back basically our entire team with just a few open roster slots. It's massively different thought process than where we were this time last year. So I look to growth, stability, and familiarity as the things that'll drive us going from 23 to 24, and not trying to reinvent the wheel, not trying to bring in all of these massive game changers and really throwing too much into chaos. It's going to be growth, development on the backs of stability and familiarity for me.
Yeah. One wild card could be what happens with a transfer for Sam Adeniran or AC Jackson. I think that that could be a wild card because you will need to basically two players that had impact the second half of the season. So if one of them were to leave, either during the winter window or the summer window, that's another roster slot that will get released and another position that the team will need to replace. But I guess we won't worry about that for now. But that's just a wild card. Wanted to call that out.
It is. That's a good thing to call out because, especially with AZ Jackson and the interest that he's garnered, the fact that we exercise the option for both of those players means that this is their last year with City, unless one of two things happen: unless a new contract is extended to them and they sign one, or they're sold. Those are the two things that I think are the best outcomes for City, the organization, and for the players from our perspective is either we get news at some point of a new contract for them or we sell them, because the alternative is we let them go on freeze at the end of their
No,
deals. Both of the players we know are too talented for that. That would be a massive missed opportunity for
it
City.
will. Yeah.
So that would be disappointing. So that's another thing to keep in mind throughout this whole process, and could drive the need to replace one or both of them in this long-term planning. So a
Hmm.
number 10, a striker, those are other options. If and when we see those kinds of things happen, you can start to piece together this along with the other things we've talked about.
Yeah. So yeah, now we wait for news, and we're gonna have another episode at some point before Christmas, right? That's the plan. You
I'm
think?
sure. Yeah, we definitely will, because that week of December 11th when things start happening, plenty to talk about between the CONCACAF Champions Cup. We'll be able to get some meaningful previewing going on for that. There'll likely be at least rumors to talk about. So we're guaranteed to do at least one more episode before Christmas. I promise you that. And more to come if more news breaks. We'll get together as soon as we can, just like we are now. Santi, thanks for getting together so quick to talk about this breakdown of our roster decisions for St. Louis City. It's been fun talking with you about it, and hope you enjoy the holidays until the next time we talk. And thank you to everybody for listening. Really appreciate you joining us as always. I've loved seeing the Spotify Wrapped stuff. Like you saw that where all the top city podcasts and people are showing that. It's an honor, and it's humbling.
That's really cool.
See.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. So keep those coming. I love seeing them. Super fun. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Matt Baker, Santiago Beltran. We're Flyover Footy. We'll talk to you later.
Vamos City.